Welcome into the Michael Welch Podcast, the #1 streaming podcast from my couch. Today, recap thoughts on the Super Bowl, Rihanna, and of course, thoughts on college basketball, who can actually win the national championship, a little March Madness preview coming up on the Michael Welch Podcast.
So the Chiefs will set up for a Super Bowl 57 game-winning field goal. Keep in mind, there's been some slipping on this field too, so even though it's a short field goal, some pressure here. For the lead. Butker up, got it! Chiefs 8 seconds away.
You can see Kansas City, they have all their defensive linemen out of the game. These are all linebackers, defensive ends.
Here we go. Hurts. As all day, now some rushers come. Going to throw it as far as his arm can take it, which is well short. And the Kansas City Chiefs have won Super Bowl 57.
Chiefs 38 and the Eagles 35. 6 seconds left in Super Bowl 57 regulation. Hurts takes the snap. The Chiefs only rushing 2 on a delay. Clock is going to be out of time, and the pass is going to be underthrown. It's incomplete. It's incomplete. Everyone who claims the Chiefs Kingdom will raise a banner above the National Football League again. For the second time in 4 seasons, the Lombardi Trophy has a red and gold reflection. A big red reflection. The Chiefs are champions of Super Bowl 57.
You will never be as excited to discuss reflections as Mitch Holthus making the call for the Kansas City radio there as the Chiefs salt away another Super Bowl. Their second in 4 years. Of course, their third appearance in 4 years as well. I think this is a big deal for Patrick Mahomes. You didn't want him to turn out like Aaron Rodgers, or he's suddenly in his 30s and you wonder, why does he only have 1 Super Bowl? They've hosted 5 straight AFC championship games, 3 playoff appearances, 2 Super Bowls. If they had lost, it would have been quite an indication, even though he's only 27, will be 28 next year, that perhaps, even if with this team at the peak of its powers, Andy Reid, second Super Bowl on a second different team, Travis Kelce, one of the best, maybe the best tight end of all time at this particular point, if he didn't win another Super Bowl with all these home field advantages and great teams and great records, and the eye test saying he's breaking all these records, but didn't have the hardware to match, you'd start to question things. And now on the flip side, now that he's done that, has a second ring, another MVP, another Super Bowl MVP, well, now you start to look the other way and say, well, he's a couple years under 30, so how many more of these will he get? I just think it's so rare for guys, no matter how good you are, to continue to win Super Bowls. We just underestimate how difficult that is. If he can win a third at any point in his career, we already know that he's going to have the records. He's going to have the hardware. He's going to have the rings. He's going to pass the eye test. And if you make it to another Super Bowl, you're going to have the wins accumulated on a team record. So he's going to have all these great statistics. If he gets a third ring, he's going to be very rarefied air. We're talking just below Tom Brady, Joe Montana, can't even talk, Joe Montana. So this is going to be a big, big milestone. And the second one is a very key piece in that. And will certainly be discussed going forward a little bit, but I don't think it's going to really have an impact on how we discuss football and great quarterbacks until a few years down the line. Just how super important this particular run is as some of these guys get older. Kelce in particular, injury is a question mark. Andy Reid's age, just different things. Have to make contract decisions. It could be a while before this team gets back. Of course, we expect year after year. They're supposed to be right in the hunt of it, as they have 5 years in a row now. But that's never just a guaranteed thing here. So just keep that in mind as his career continues here. As for the game itself, it was a barn burner, obviously. The key point is going to be the late holding call that was called there in the fourth quarter with Kansas City driving. Had it not been called, they would have kicked a field goal anyways, a very makeable field goal, but the Eagles would have had the ball left down a field goal there with about a minute, and a half left on the clock. and had an opportunity to drive down and either tie or set up a game-winning score. But I don't think you can punish, referees for that too much. That's the kind of call that should be called. It was actually a penalty. The corner went ahead and said that he tugged the jersey and that he tried to get away with it. And I understand not wanting referees to make a call and to swallow the whistle, but you kind of have to make that call, in my opinion. That's why you play the games. That's why that's an illegal move, even if it was subtle. It kind of impeded the receiver there. I believe it was Juju Smith-Schuster off the top of my head, but that's why you do it. You get frustrated when they're not made during the regular season, so why would you want them to not make the call during the Super Bowl? It's ticky-tacky, but it shouldn't have been done, and it allowed Kansas City to get the first down, just basically run a couple plays, take a couple kneel downs, run the clock all the way down there, and as you heard, kick what would be the game-winning field goal. The final pass from Jalen Hurts was pretty miserable. It went about 50 yards downfield, but wasn't catchable by anyone. Kansas City scored on every possession in the second half. 38-35 was the final. Mahomes won Super Bowl MVP and, of course, regular season MVP. He's only the third guy to do that behind Montana and Brady, of course. The Eagles become the second team to blow a double-digit halftime Super Bowl lead after the 2017 Falcons team, of course, that infamously lost to the Pats. Now, the turf was a big problem in this game. Of course, the turf guy there has done a number of big events, and I think every single Super Bowl, he gets a post every year. They take very careful precaution in putting this turf together. They roll it inside, they roll it outside, particularly in the stadium. They shouldn't have had so many problems with this, knowing the climate, having done this before. It was really ridiculous to put such a horrible field on the floor. A number of guys probably have bad ankles today. It really screwed up several players. Guys lost balance several times. It's a good thing it didn't appear to really cost a big play, but certainly here and there, guys lost the opportunity for extra yardage or to make a tackle. And just a horrible, horrible look for the NFL to put such an inferior field down to play its biggest game on. It just looked like shit. It's just horrific. Now, in the first half, the Eagles had almost twice as many first downs as Kansas City had run plays. They just played keep away from Patrick Mahomes, and it was really through the air and not on the ground. They didn't have a lot of success on the ground, which is a little bit surprising. Jalen Hurts finished with 15 accredited carries for 70 yards and 3 touchdowns, which was a Super Bowl record on its own. Outside of that, only about 40 yards rushing combined from the rest of the tailbacks. Miles Sanders took a while to get going there. He only had 16 yards, Gainwell 21-8 for Boston Scott. Just a poor performance on the ground there. But it looked like more of a modern offense from the Eagles early, and it looked like that would be their success. They went for it on fourth down. They were 2 for 2. They were 11 for 16 on third downs, able to convert a number of QB sneaks that they just couldn't be stopped. They moved the quarterback around, of course, and involved him in the game plan. Great on the option stuff. Hurts is, of course. They took a couple big shots down the field, which is exactly what you want there. Kind of like in basketball, how you either want to get the ball in the paint and get an easy shot right at the rim or shoot 3-pointers. This was a little bit similar, where you're either just running the ball and being efficient behind one of the best offensive lines ever and just doing a great job mulling guys over on the defensive line, or you're taking deep shots downfield, big plays, which is exactly how they got a touchdown there to A.J. Brown, a big 45-yarder down the field. He finished with 6 catches for 96 yards and a grab. Devontae Smith, known for his big plays in championship games, had 7 grabs for 100 yards. He had a 45-yarder as well. Each of those guys targeted quite a bit, 8 and 9 targets respectively. Only 3 catches by wide receivers outside of those guys. The biggest problem came on the fumble by Hurts, of course, which was returned for the touchdown. And as you progress into the second half, Mahomes, who looks just fine on that ankle there, was able to kind of hobble along after only 1 big hit in the second half and do a great job. They scored on every possession in the second half there. They missed a field goal in the first half, which you wondered if that would come back to bite them, but it was ultimately the Eagles' mistakes which were problems. The fumble that was returned for a touchdown, a big punt return in the fourth quarter, which set up the Chiefs, in position for a big drive that they scored on, and then the late hold there. But Pachenko finished with 15 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown. They were able to get some good push on the Eagles there. Patrick Mahomes himself had a big 26-yard scamper. McKinnon made a couple of plays. Sky Moore was involved. Kelsey only had 6 targets, 6 catches, and 81 yards and a touchdown. Juju Smith-Schuster had several grabs, 7 of them for 53. Watson had a couple catches, McKinnon as well. So no one else was too involved there. Ventless Scantling, surprisingly, 1 target, 0 catches. But just a great job and very methodical in what they were able to do. Mahomes was only 21 for 27 for 182 yards, but 3 touchdowns. And just great play by them, and only allowing 11 points in the second half to the Eagles, who really struggled at times to be able to continue drives. And again, if this game was played 10 times, it might be a 50-50 split. You have to assume maybe Patrick Mahomes is healthier, and they're able to really baffle that Eagles defense that disappeared completely in the second half, so maybe they're able to exploit it a little bit more and put more points on the board possibly and not have the struggles they had in the first half. On the flip side, maybe the Eagles don't have those horrible problems with the big punt return, the hold, and the turnover that was returned for a touchdown. Of course, the missed field goal on Kansas City as well. So a few things could have been different. This was a close game as it was. And I think if this was played 10 times, that you still could have had a split here. So just a great ball game. It was pretty clean. Other than that, there were a few offsides, a couple penalties, ticky-tacky here and there, as these teams just made chess moves against each other back and forth. But really, for the most part, just the Chiefs having troubles early and staying in the game. Not staying in the game, but keeping it close with that touchdown. Eagles defense kind of disappearing late, but they're still very much in it. Just a really good football game. Rihanna's halftime show was good. It would have been fun to see her move around a little bit more, but she was pregnant, obviously. It took me a minute to realize that. I was thinking, I didn't see any news that she was expecting a second child, and she's not still pregnant from the first, obviously, so a little bit surprising to me, but you don't turn down the chance to perform in the Super Bowl. She might not even have known she was pregnant at the time that she was asked. And they certainly built a performance around her. So it was a little disappointing not to see her be able to be more active or do some kind of tunnel run, which is kind of what the Weeknd do, or do more stuff out on the field. But it was fine for what it was. I wasn't surprised she didn't bring any guests out. She is still, I think it's hard for people to wrap their mind around that people still sell a lot of music post like 2005. She is one of the best-selling artists ever. And that part of that is taking streaming into effect, but they do keep a tally for that. And she's still one of the best streaming artists ever. Like, we're talking Led Zeppelin numbers. We're talking Elton John numbers. She is one of the best ever selling. And it seems to be really hard for people to wrap their mind around just her popularity, the groups she touches on demographically, and her singing ability. Even though she hasn't released music in a very long time, just where she touches, she's passed $1 billion net worth thanks to her makeup company. So she's got a far extending reach in a lot of different areas. And she's a mega super artist to have perform. And she did a good job. Just lots of bullshit social media comments on her being on a platform and they're tired of rap music and just all kinds of junk from normal people, I guess, as you see celebrities and different folks congratulate her on her pregnancy and say it was a very interesting choice to be up on a platform, but you seem to be just fine and just safe. And they always question the sexual stuff on there, which I think we can calm down on a little bit since we no longer have live TV, period. It's on delay because the boob was shown on the Super Bowl. So I think we can calm down a bit on that particular part and what has come since that. And as far as rap music being performed and that kind, everyone complains about the genre at every festival, every event ever, because everyone has different tastes. And for the record, last year, with Snoop Dogg and Eminem and Dr. Dre, that was the first time in the history of the Super Bowl that a hip-hop performance has been performed. And for the record, Rihanna is technically considered a pop artist, just to set the record straight on a lot of those bullshit social media stuff that goes around. So, did we get a pretty great performance from a really good vocalist who was also a black woman and one of the best-selling artists of all time, who announced her pregnancy that way, which was very interesting. Kind of cool. Yeah, we sure did. And I think we should leave it at that. Great Super Bowl, really good halftime performance. I wanted to do a little thought exercise on how many teams can actually win the college basketball national championship this season. Of course, we've had a record number of teams through the first 12 weeks in the AP poll, 50 different squads. And it's settled down a little bit now that we're in week 15, as we've kind of sorted out who was good and who's bad. We just don't know who is the best. So I thought I'd do a little thought exercise here, running through each of the kind of conferences, picking out the best teams, kind of slimming down to who might be the best teams come tournament time. Keeping in mind that getting to the Final Four is one adventure, but once you get there, can you beat presumably two really good teams to actually take the title home once you get there? So this isn't necessarily who can make a run, but who can actually win a national championship. So let's walk through a little bit of a review here. So starting with the ACC, which has been a mess. I'm not sure how anyone from this entire conference can realistically win a national championship. No one's coming out of here very strong. Pitt leads the ACC in conference play at 12-3. They're 29th in KenPom, 51st in the net. Virginia is 14th in KenPom, 13th in net, 7th in the AP. A lot of popularity there. Highest ranked team. Miami's 31 in KenPom, 30 in net, 15 AP. NC State's 43rd in KenPom, 36 and 23. They did lose as I was putting this together this week here. So those are the top three. Duke and North Carolina join Miami, Virginia, and NC State in the top 50 of the net rankings and in KenPom. The bottom of the conference is absolutely appalling. Florida State and Louisville, of course, have been highly publicized for how badly they're losing. They're both outside of the top 200 at the moment, I believe. Boston College, Notre Dame, Wake Forest all join them outside of the top 175 teams in college basketball. There are 363, just for note. They're, of course, not going to have any shot at the NCAA tournament. Wake Forest might have a shot if they can win a few more games here. Virginia Tech and Syracuse, probably out of the tournament. Virginia Tech is 2-4 in quad 1. And 3 losses combined in quads 3 and 4. Syracuse has 2 quad 3 losses, but is 0-8 in quad 1. For reference, a quad 1 win, for reference, it counts as quad 1 win if you beat a team that's in the top 25 at home, top 50 neutral site, or top 75 away. So 25, 50, 75, home, neutral, away. And then quads 2, 3, 4 expand out from that to hit the 365 total. Positive wins are generally looked at as quad 1 and 2. Not as important are quad 3 and 4. However, if you lose to a quad 3-4 team, they're viewed as bad losses, essentially. The other 7 teams in the ACC here, all estimated to make the NCAA tournament at the moment. Of course, depends on the last handful of regular season games and sometimes making up a couple wins in the ACC tournament. So let's hit on Duke real quick. 3-7 in quad 1, no bad losses. Struggles this season. A couple great freshmen there, but just all kinds of problems under the new John Shire there taking over at head coach. And the 200s in effective field goal shooting, turnovers, shooting percentage. The defense isn't very good. They are the tallest team in the country, but also one of the youngest. One shooter that averages more than 2 3-point attempts per game has hit better than 33%, so just horrid there. Jeremy Roach is the veteran point guard that has returned 43% from the field there, 33% from 3, so just bad metrics there. Pros and Derek Lively and Derek Whitehead, probably one and dones, but just not a great collective group there. Might not make the NCAA tournament and won't be the only blue blood having that problem. UNC, remember they made the great run last year to the NCAA tournament, and they weren't even in the top 25 in a lot of metrics until the last week of the regular season when they beat Duke on the road there in Coach Krzyzewski's final home game, and then made won a couple games in the ACC tournament, and then ripped off a nice run in the NCAA tournament all the way into the final championship game there. Well, this season right now, they are 0-9 in quad one games. So when you say they haven't beat anyone, that's the definition right there. So again, that's 0 top 25 teams at home, 0 top 50 teams at a neutral site, 0 top 75 teams on the road. They are 6-1 in quad two. So quad two is a 26 to 50 ranking range at home. And then, 51 to 100 neutral site win, or a 76 to 151 away win. So they've picked up a few of those, but they're not impressive, and they're going to be on the bubble as well. They're less than 50% true shooting, 30% three-point shooting. That's 330th in the country. They don't turn the ball over, but they don't force turnovers. 3 opportunities for solid wins left: at NC State, home against Virginia, home against Duke. That's one of the toughest remaining ACC schedules left. But this isn't a team that's going to make a run like last year, where they were also pretty empty in quad one up until the last couple weeks. It's just not looking good there. Armando Bangkok, who's such a great player for them, ACC Player of the Year last year, expressing in the press conferences that, just put some guys around me. Let's play, similar to the Kentucky situation we'll get to in a moment with Oscar Tshiebwe, but just a lot of problems there in year 2 under new coaching staff in North Carolina. Clemson, 3 quad 3 and 4 losses. Not good there. 2 and 4 in quad 1. They were ahead early in ACC play. It looks good in the non-conference, but it really looked like a hollow record. That's kind of held true. They're decent in efficient shooting on offense. They limit opponents on defense, but they struggled in losses against better teams. Second in the country in free throws. 18th in 2-point percentage allowed. Good on that end. But too many questionable losses. South Carolina, Loyola Chicago, who's a dumpster fire this year. Unfortunately, Boston College, just not a national championship winner here. Not much doing in the ACC, which, has clearly struggled. Pitt is 5-2 in quad 1. 3-3 in quad 2. Also has a couple 3 and 4 quad losses. Rattle off 6 straight wins at this point. Will be favored in, I think, every game except for the finale on the road at Miami. Looks like they won't be favored against Virginia Tech coming up here either. Realistically, they've lost to 5 bubble teams, Duke and a god-awful Florida State team. So it's not quite as bad as some resumes, certainly. They do have a win over Miami, Virginia, 2 over North Carolina by a combined 9 points. So Razors edge there as the best wins on the board. They take 37.8% of their shots from 3. That's 19th in the country. They hit it a decent percentage. They were bottom of the league preseason, so it's shocking they're even have a chance at the ACC title. They lean heavily on their veterans starting 5 and are one of the older teams nationally. So just a good veteran crew kind of pushing them forward here. They've won games when the 3 ball hasn't been falling, so it isn't necessarily completely reliant on that. They've been able to survive that. This team might continue to kind of surprise in the ACC tournament, maybe in the NCAA tournament, but it's not looking like an NCAA tournament shocker. Can't quite take it that far. NC State, 3 and 4 in quad 1, 3 and 3 in quad 2. They don't turn the ball over. They don't shoot at an awesome rate. The losses aren't bad, but when you lose to all the good teams, who have you really beaten? Miami by 2 in overtime at home. Duke by 24 are what's keeping the lights on here. They've been hammered several times. That's the Wolfpack right now. Let's talk Virginia first. They're 4 and 4 in quad 1. Baylor and Illinois were 2 big scalps they captured early back-to-back in November. Then they're in the muck with the ACC otherwise. They lost the only meeting to Miami by 2, the only meeting against Pittsburgh by 3, and they beat Duke in overtime by 7. They'll have a chance to sweep North Carolina, but the road game is coming up. They are top 3 in adjusted offensive efficiency and defense, according to KenPom. Top 25 team 3-point shooting team. They stop the 2-ball. They usually play, of course, one of the slowest tempos in the country, and that can cause some close games. They hit free throws at only 70%. That's not very good. But one of the overall best shooting teams with 4 guys that shoot 39% or better from 3. Jaden Gardner does a bulk of the shooting. The big 6'6 center. I shouldn't say big. The 6'6 center. Kellahide Clark is 5'10 at point. The last guy from the 2019 championship team, I believe. But the size is not good. The size is not good there. Miami is 5-4 in quad 1. They do have a weird quad 3 loss on there. That was by 6 to Georgia Tech. They lost in overtime to NC State by 2, Duke by 2, Pitt by 2. They're thumped by Maryland back in November by 18, but this team hasn't lost at home and has obviously played a lot of close games there. They've beaten all the other ACC teams except for Pitt, and they'll get another shot in 2 weeks, so they may have at least one win over all the solid ACC squads. The offense, top 25 in efficient shooting. They hit 2s, 3s, 15th nationally in free throws. Isaiah Wong and Jordan Miller lead the guard-heavy team. 5 guys shoot 35% or better from 3. I was going to try and stick with one tier, just teams that I was going to hope to come down to just a handful of teams that can straight up win the national championship. But I think I am going to do a 2-tier system. Teams that can win the national championship and teams that can make it as far as the national championship game, such as North Carolina last year, but not win it, which seems strange when sometimes 1 or 2 baskets can make the difference. But very rarely do you watch a sporting event and say the wrong team won the championship. That just doesn't happen very often. You may say this team may be probably the 3rd best team, but really when you're looking at the top 5, it's in a tiered system. But very rarely do you just say this team had no business being there, if that makes any sense. So I think I'm going to do a tier system rather than pick one clear-cut favorite right now, but maybe a handful of favorites and then a cut below that where teams that can make a good run and have a shot at it if everything breaks right, and do it that way. So I'm just going to take Miami here. I don't think any team can win the national championship from this group. But to recap the North Carolina team last year, or the UCLA game from 2021, UCLA won a first 4 game against Michigan State. They were trailing in that game. They were a bubble team to begin with. Won that game against Michigan State, made a comeback, made it all the way to the Final 4, lost in a 3-point heave to Jalen Suggs of Gonzaga. Otherwise, they would have had a chance to go to overtime, win that game, go to the national championship. But Gonzaga won it, went to the national championship, played Baylor, and was thumped soundly. Baylor was clearly the better team, but still, UCLA was real close to just playing in that game after being, on the flip side, possibly not even in the tournament just a few weeks earlier. And that's just the thin edge. But realistically, if they'd won the whole thing, you would have been thinking, this is not the best team. UNC last season, they were down in the second round to the number 1 seed Baylor by 24 points. And again, they were an 8 seed. UNC was an 8 seed in the tournament, but was kind of fringe until the last couple weeks in building a resume to make the tournament at all. Made it as an 8 seed, won the first game. Then were matched up in the 8-9 against number 1 Baylor. They were banged up last year, the Baylor Bears were. They had a 24-point lead on North Carolina. And the Tar Heels actually lost Brady Manick to a flagrant foul, and it just looked really bad for them. They rallied, came all the way back, tied the game, went to overtime, won it. I think that's still the greatest margin of victory in an NCAA tournament game. Then had a couple breaks almost. They played Duke. Obviously, they won that game in the last regular season matchup. Playing them again, a rivalry, in a good matchup in the tournament. This is actually pretty fortunate, I think. Then, of course, they got St. Peter's in the mix there, which eventually wore out their welcome. So they had a few things certainly go their way. It's not that they didn't earn them. It's just a few crazy things certainly had to go right and work out and match up for them to make it all the way to the national championship game. And I think Miami could be one of those teams this year, although I'm not going to place any teams at the moment from the ACC into the championship bracket, but we'll get to that at the end. So let's tackle the Big 12 next, trying to stay in alphabetical order here. So we'll hit the Big 12. Yeah, Big 12. 6 of the top 10 teams in strength of schedule are from the Big 12. All 10 are in the top 34 of KenPom, including 14 and 12 Texas Tech because of their tough schedule. It's hard to win any road games in this conference. Kansas, Texas, Baylor are all ranked in the top 10 of the AP poll, KenPom and Net rankings, Kansas being the highest. Iowa State, 19th AP, 17th KenPom, 16th Net. Kansas State is 12, 26, 22, favored a little bit more in just the voting. TCU is 22, 23, 21. So that's a little bit closer in the early 20s there. So let's start with, let's start with this. Everyone in the conference has had 11 to 17 quad one opportunities. That's a lot. Due to the strength of the schedule. Oklahoma State had the fewest with 11. Kansas has had the most with 17. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Texas Tech are all clearly the bottom layer there. They've got the fewest quad one wins, but they all have 3 or 4. Texas Tech and Oklahoma State each have a quad 3 loss as well, kind of on the bad end of the spectrum. TCU is 5 and 7 in quad 1. They have a rare quad 4 loss, but its top 2 players were out in that game earlier in the season. They've also lost 3 straight at this point, so they're kind of slipping out. They shoot well from 2, but are one of the worst in the country from 3. The free throws are iffy. They've lost 7 of 11 overall. So that team is on the outs. Iowa State surprised this season as a rebooting franchise last year. Lots of transfers in, kind of rebuilding as well. Defense is probably the best in the conference. And the offense isn't bad, but the turnovers, the free throws are. Kansas State holds teams to 29% shooting from 3, which is phenomenal. They shoot pretty well as well. Marcus Noel, Keontae Johnson are phenomenal players. Johnson was the Florida Gator that nearly died from a heart attack a couple years back. He recovered, transferred, is here at Kansas State. So they have a couple phenomenal offensive players, but Kansas State isn't quite as good as the upper crust here either. So let's talk Kansas, Texas, Baylor, the upper level of this conference. Baylor and Texas, 9 and 6 in quad 1. Kansas, 12 and 5 in quad 1. Jalen Wilson for Kansas is phenomenal. Returns from last season, 20 points, 8 boards a game. Freshman Grady Dick is a string bean out there as a big, but he shoots 42% from 3, 84% from the line, which is great, in addition to being kind of that stretch guy. They broke out of a 3-game slide in January with losses to Kansas State in overtime, blowout loss to TCU and Baylor on the road, but that was part of this 12 straight quad 1 game stretch they're currently in because everyone's very good here. They're ranked in the top 20 in adjusted offensive and defensive efficiency. Turnovers and free throws aren't red flags. They've got players. They've got size. They might not win the Big 12 just due to the remaining schedule here, but they might be the very best team here. Texas has top guard in Marcus Carr, 17 points, 4 assists, 2.8 rebounds, 46% shooting, 40% from 3, 12th in offensive adjusted efficiency, 32nd on defense. Very good to be in the top 30, top 40 in both categories. Their 2% shooting percentage is very high. Threes are average. Free throws are solid. Turnovers aren't bad. Defense is good. They have a couple double-digit losses, one at home, one in overtime. The only recent road loss was to Texas Tech, which is the only one that's a little iffy there. Still a quad 1, but just a little weird there. They're touch small in the starting group, although that might not matter in the long run. Lots of seniors. I don't know how to account for the coaching changeover with the dismissal of Coach Beard a month into the season due to the allegations there, which have now been dismissed, and just a weird situation. We're now a little bit further removed from there. The coaching staff has done a good job, and Texas just keeps on rolling, but not sure about the continuity there. Obviously, last year was his first season anyways, bringing in a bunch of transfers, so it's just kind of a weird mixer for the past 2 seasons anyways, but not sure how that impacts what would look like if they just all of a sudden won a national championship. That'd be very, very strange. The Baylor Bears, who've won a national championship in the past couple years, obviously, but have really been probably the best program for the past 5 seasons, and that seems to go truly unappreciated. They punched out UCLA and Gonzaga on the non-conference schedule. They lost to Virginia and Marquette, so they kind of split very difficult games there. It was a brutal slate besides the conference play. They had 3 games slate from December to January. That was all losses. I don't think they were healthy at that time because they can't ever stay healthy. They might be as fully healed and together as they are right now, coming off 4 straight wins as they have in several seasons. They have the number 1 adjusted offensive efficiency in the country. The defense is above average in general. They have a great perimeter defense, but suffer on the interior. Adam Flagler and LJ Cryer have been around for a while now. They're shooting over 40% from 3. Freshman Keontae George is averaging 14, 4, and 3. The top 5 guys are all shooting over 75% from the line. And this team just still has a lot of leadership from the 2021 championship team and should just not be counted out. They're getting hot. They can do it. So I would take Baylor, Kansas, and Texas under championship consideration for my 2 tiers. Championship contenders, and could at least make the championship game if it broke right. So we'll move them forward. The Big Ten. Purdue is clearly the number 1. They weren't expected to be there preseason, but this was expected to be a hodgepodge preseason. Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan State, Iowa, Maryland, Illinois are all clumped together. Michigan and Rutgers are a step behind. Wisconsin, Penn State will struggle to make the tournament. Nebraska, Minnesota, Ohio State are bad. Ohio State might be looking for a new coach here, surprisingly. They're 3-11 in the Big Ten. Purdue should be the easy pick for contender, although all of a sudden they've lost a couple in a row here. Indiana is ranked, but does not necessarily look to be the clear second best. So I'm going to make this just a little bit quicker than the ACC run through here. Michigan's 3-9 in quad 1. They have a quad 4 loss. Rutgers is 4-6 in quad 1 and has 2 quad 3 losses. Both have multiple quad 3 losses. So what I'm trying to say is they lose a whole lot more than they win against good competition, and they have some questionable stuff against inferior competition. Bubble teams. So Maryland and Illinois, both 3-7 in quad 1, no bad losses. They look like tournament teams right now. Actually, as I'm finishing this up, Maryland just waxed off Purdue, blew them out. So a little bit of a shocker there. Indiana, 5-7 in quad 1, no bad losses. They've beaten North Carolina, Xavier on the road, Purdue, Michigan State, Illinois on the road. The metrics like the Hoosiers. 22nd in adjusted offensive efficiency. Don't worry, I can say it. 22nd in adjusted offensive efficiency. 37th in defense. The effective field goal is good for both offensive and defensive. They're good shooters. They stop good shooters. They shoot well. They mute opponents. They've also been blown out 5 times. So I don't know what the hell is going on with that. Rutgers, Arizona, Kansas, Penn State, Maryland. All away games are neutral site. I'm not sure how you're winning 2, 3, 4 of these kind of games in the tournament. Trace Jackson Davis is the big star, shooting there almost 70% from the floor, which is what you want from your bigs. Jalen Hood Scafino is the awesome freshman there. But I can't quite see all the pieces in the right positions lining up. The losses are questionable, and I don't know, just a weird case there for the Hoosiers. Michigan State 6-7 with a quad 3 loss, 6-7 in quad 1, 5-5 in the last 10. Good defense, pretty good guards, solid strength of schedule because of how many teams they play in the non-con. They shoot a good 3 ball, but outside of that, the offense is really quite horrific. Iowa's actually 7-6 in quad 1 play, has a weird quad 4 loss, good offensive metrics, bad defensive metrics. Northwestern has a couple more quad 2 losses. They're 7-4 in quad 1, so they have more than everyone else in that lower rung in the Big Ten without the losses to account for. They just beat Purdue They're 12-4 at home, 6-2 on the road. They had a bad blowout loss to Ohio State, but everything else falls in line. This looks like a legit team that's only been in the NCAA tournament, I think, once in its school history. It was the last Power 5 school to make an NCAA tournament within the last couple of years. They've won 4 straight now: Wisconsin, Ohio State on the road, Purdue and Indiana at home. The defense is phenomenal. Top 25 in adjusted efficiency. Effective field goal percentage, 2-point defense, steals, blocks. They can hit free throws. The offense is generally really bad, according to the metrics, but they're able to really turn things around when the defense is clicking. And so far, in a decent Big Ten, not as many loaded teams, but certainly a squad here in Northwestern that can actually win some games and seems to be properly rated, according to a lot of metrics and standings here. Purdue now has lost 3 of 4, 6th in adjusted offense, 31st in defense. Defense is good. They block shots with Zach Edey there. They hit free throws. They can shoot the 2-ball. Aren't a good 3-point shooting team. And typically teams with freshmen, especially a guard, don't win championships. You have to wonder if this could be the exception after the great run to start the season, but after the last week, now it's questionable again, I would think. Fletcher Lawyer, Brandon Smith have been phenomenal. This team still has size outside of 7'4" Edey. I think this team, although obvious, is what it appears to be. And that's a team that's struggling a little bit right now, but still a championship contender. And it's the only team from the Big Ten that I would kind of take for my top tier teams that could do that. So moving on to the Pac-12, sort of like the Big Ten, this team is slim at the top. Might have a couple contenders here in UCLA and Arizona, both in the top 10 in metrics, lead the conference here. UCLA 3 in KenPom, 5 in net. Zona 13 in KenPom, 11 in net. No one else is in the top 40 by any metric. Not in the top 40. Utah, USC, Arizona State, Oregon are all in the mix to make the tournament. Then we have a clear divide, and then we have Colorado, Washington State, Stanford, Washington, Oregon State, and 3-22 California. How about that? Utah's 1-5 in Quad 1. USC's 3-4 in Quad 1. Oregon's 3-7 in Quad 1. All 3 teams have several Quad 2 losses, are hovering around 500, I think, which isn't horrible, but they're all not crushing it. They have multiple Quad 3 losses. Arizona State's 3-2 in Quad 1, but 3-5 in Quad 2. They have a Quad 4 loss. Oregon just isn't good. I think we can stick with that. USC plays good defense thanks in part to Josh Morgan's 2.4 blocks per game. Utah actually has one of the best defenses in the country. They hold teams under 28% from 3 and 43% from 2. The offense just isn't anything to write home about. Brendan Carlson is the leading scorer, and he's a center that shoots 53% from the field. Starting guards shoot under 40%. That's just not good. That's not good at all. So let's touch on UCLA and Arizona. Now, the Bruins are 4-4 in Quad 1. They're clean everywhere else. They haven't had a chance to play really, really good teams. They lost to Illinois and Baylor in the non-con. They lost to Arizona and USC on the road. That makes Kentucky on a neutral site, a road game to Maryland, and home against USC as the solid wins, I guess. The metrics are good. The defense is top 5 adjusted. Offense is top 25 nationally. 3-point percentage is 36% for the team, and they hold opponents to 30. Those are solid numbers. They don't turn the ball over, but they don't force turnovers. Free throw number, middle of the road. Jamie Vasquez, Tiger Campbell, Jaden Clark are all part of this team that made a run in 2021. David Singleton is shooting 44% from 3 off the bench. 5 guys are averaging double figures. This feels like a team that should make a run, much like the 2021 team did that kind of used its abilities there a little bit too early, if you will. But no wins away from home against great teams, and really no great teams on the resume. I mean, Illinois, Baylor, Arizona were your best ones. Kentucky might not make the tournament. That's just tough. At Maryland's probably the best win right now. And that just doesn't look real great, especially with no good away wins, with the tournament being neutral, obviously. Arizona now, 6-2 in quad 1. They do have a quad 3 loss. They have wins over Tennessee, Creighton, USC, UCLA. Losses, though, to Utah by 15, Oregon by 19, Stanford by 9, Washington State at home by 13. All of these games scattered throughout the season. They didn't just have a rough patch. Stanford won't be in the tournament. Washington State won't be in the tournament. Utah probably will. Oregon probably won't. Bad teams. Year 2 under Tommy Lloyd here, formerly of Gonzaga. Assistant. They play one of the fastest tempos in the country. They hit 56% of twos. That's 11th nationally. Over 35% three ball. The defense is good, but the turnovers that come up with the style of play is bad. That's really bad. They're one of the worst defenders in the country. So Arizona and UCLA will clash again in the next few weeks. It would be easy to say UCLA is better and has a better chance to win a championship, but we've seen good teams take bad losses and are still the last team standing. I think the key is to be a really good team that beats other really good teams. And we've seen that from Arizona. We have not really seen that from UCLA right now. So that's obviously an arguable point. But I think the bad losses that pile up are also not great. But for right now, we'll take these two teams, I think Arizona and UCLA, in advance as possible championship winners. Let's talk Southeastern Conference. Alabama's been ruling the roost, although they just dropped a game to the Tennessee Volunteers, and those are arguably the top two teams in the conference. Tied, Vols, both ranked in the top 10. Texas A&M ranked up there in conference standings. They're technically second with Tennessee in third. That might have just flip-flopped, but they're up there. Alabama's runaway still, I think, for conference title right now, even though it's not exactly what we're discussing right now. Aggies had a tough non-conference schedule that saw losses to Wofford, Colorado, and Murray State. After that, we have Auburn at 8-5 in conference play. The other 10 teams are 7-5 or worse in conference play, and right around 500, a couple games above. But that just matters in whether they'll even make the tournament at all. Vanderbilt is 14-12 overall and tied for 6th in the SEC. So the strength is just not really there. Tennessee, Missouri, Georgia have looked good early and been losing. Kentucky and Texas A&M struggled early and have been winning a little bit more. Young, talented Arkansas has been injured. Auburn is now on a 2-game slide. So what are we looking at here? LSU, South Carolina, Ole Miss are combined 5-34 in the SEC. They're out. Georgia, Arkansas, Mississippi State all have overall winning records but losing SEC records. Florida and Vanderbilt just above 500 in league play, all bubble teams. So Arkansas, worth mentioning because they have lost 4 starters from last season, brought in a superstar recruiting class with Eric Musselman there. Great coach. Nick Smith was injured to start the season, superstar freshman. Then he missed another stretch of games. Now he's back again, and they've lost the games he's come back to play. Should be a difference maker for the squad moving forward. But, man, it's been a hell of a year. One of the worst three-point shooting teams, free throws, unforced turnover teams in the country, despite good defensive numbers, actually. So some of these young guys can get to shooting, which is what they're familiar with after coming from their respective high schools, putting up numbers. You just don't usually expect to see defensive numbers on a team that's kind of thrown together. But that's where they're at. You'd think the offense would come. Still a chance, but not for a championship at this particular point. Just as a note when filling out your bracket. They end the season against Florida, Georgia, at Alabama, at Tennessee, and Kentucky. That's going to be brutal. I'm not sure if they get on track there, but I don't know. Maybe they figure something out. Moving to the next group, Kentucky, Missouri, Auburn. I'm throwing Texas A&M in this group. Missouri's 12-1 in the non-con with a win over Iowa State and Illinois, but they're around 500 in the crummy SEC. They've been blown out multiple times. They're very small. The defense, outside of being really good at stealing the ball, is not very good. The offense is potent with Kobe Brown shooting 45% from 3, 78% from the field free throw line. The defense, though, is just bleeding. So that team's just not going to continue to be really successful there. Auburn is 2-6 in quad one. The resume is just as hollow as anyone with a decent overall record. Northwestern they beat in a 43-42 low scoring game months ago. They beat Missouri by 33 at home, but we just walked through Missouri and their resume. They beat banged up Arkansas as well. But those are like the best 3 wins. The defense holds teams to 23% 3-point shooting. 45% from 2, that's solid, but they shoot under 30% from 3, which is 342nd in the country. They're well coached and they're talented, but they're just not a factor right now. They struggle with free throws. Johnny Broom is a great post player, one of the best shot blockers in the country, but this team is just not going to make a lot of moves. Kentucky 2-7 in quad one. People are calling for Coach Cal's job. They've made some lineup adjustments, but Coach K just doesn't seem to have the recipe this year. And we're starting to get further and further away from his one national championship and his deep tournament runs here at Kentucky. They've missed the tournament a couple of years in the past 4 or 5 seasons here. This group is long, they're athletic, they rebound. Oscar Tshiebwe is the returning player of the year from last season, where they lost to St. Peter's in the opening round, as you remember. A lot of people there in Kentuckyville certainly do, but the free throw shooting is poor, and everyone outside of Oscar seems really unreliable. They might not make the NCAA tournament. Texas A&M, they're 4-4 in quad one, 2 early quad 4 losses. They haven't played meetings against Tennessee or Alabama yet. They only have 1 meeting against each of those teams. They swept Auburn and Florida. They split with Arkansas, and they lost the only meeting to Kentucky. They have some outlier stats, good, bad. Offense is top 25, but the resume is just really not super strong, and we'll see their last 4 or 5 games how they look against Tennessee or Alabama. I think they might get thumped a couple times. Tennessee, these are the big teams now. Tennessee, Alabama. Tennessee is 6-2 in quad one, 3-2 in quad 2 though. Losing record there. I don't know what's going on. They're kind of all ass and no gas. Thick backside. They play a lot of defense. Number 1 in adjusted and effective defensive rating. Number 1 3-point defense in the nation. Number 7 2-point defense in the nation. But the offense is the problem per usual. They've beaten Texas. They've beaten Alabama. 2 of the top teams in the discussions here, but they were rolled by Colorado and Florida. They lost to Vanderbilt, Missouri, Kentucky. I've always been of the mindset that defense may win championships, as the saying goes, but offense wins the damn games. You can't get to the championship level without stacking up some bodies on the way, and you got to put up some points and be effective in doing that. Rick Barnes' teams are always struggle in the tournament, are known for that. This year doesn't look any different, and they don't have like one clear offensive star to carry the burden for them in that particular case either throughout the tournament. Alabama 7-4 in quad one. They were hammered by UConn and Oklahoma. They lost to Gonzaga, and the only meeting to Tennessee that they've had, but they had a very difficult non-conference schedule. Wins over Michigan State, Houston, Memphis, North Carolina. They shouldn't lose another SEC game probably. They do play Texas A&M on the road to end the season. 16th in adjusted offense, 4th in adjusted defense. They shoot threes. They are second fastest team tempo in the country. They hold opponents to 42% shooting. That defensive piece is what they're missing for the run and gun offense. Number 1 in the country at holding opponents at 42% 2-point shooting. Number 2 at holding them to 26 on threes. Brandon Miller, freshman, could win player of the year. 18.7 points on 45% shooting, 42% from 3, over 8 rebounds per game. They've got some youth. They've got a little bit of a turnover problem that goes along with this offense. Arizona's got that issue as well. Alabama's the only SEC team I'm going to advance from this group. I just can't take Tennessee or Texas A&M because of the problems outlined, but Alabama I can. The Big East, effectively the 6th power conference in basketball. Georgetown brings up the rear of this conference at 6-21. DePaul, Butler, St. John's, 13-13. Villanova, with Jupiter there at coach now, out of the conversation. The top half have been in a fist fight. UConn and its bigs look like the top team early. The young Creighton Blue Jays struggled and have been making a fight to the top again. Marquette and Xavier are at the top right now, sitting at 20-6 and 19-6 overall. Seton Hall and Providence are in the mix for the conference at least. But what title contenders do we have here, if any? Connecticut, top 20 in offensive and defensive adjusted efficiency. Only a handful of those squads. They hold opponents to less than 30% from 3 and 45% from 2 while shooting it very well themselves. They don't have horrible metrics, and they blew out teams like Alabama, Iowa State, Florida, Oregon early that had people discussing that they might be the best team in the country, but they've gotten thumped in conference play by pretty much everyone. They're swept by Xavier, so just not looking good once hitting conference play finally. Jordan Hawkins, the second leading scorer, is only shooting 41%. Adamano Segona, did not say that right. The center is the leading scorer at 17.7 boards, and he's only shooting 58%. You'd like to see some of those numbers go up. Sits at 6-6 in quad 1. They have a quad 3 loss. Just struggling there now. Seton Hall's offense is horrific. We're talking 32% from 3, 69% free throws. They turn the ball over. The defense is phenomenal, but the offense is wretched. They're 5-10 combined between quad 1 and 2. They have a quad 3 loss, but just bad metrics on one side of the ball. Providence 4-5 in quad 1. They have a quad 3 loss. Everyone has a quad 3 loss. They don't lose at home. That's the sticking point there. They lose away. They've picked up their biggest wins over Marquette in double overtime and Creighton in double overtime. The metrics aren't bad, but it's just, double overtime wins and home wins are the credit there. Creighton lost 6 straight from Thanksgiving till almost Christmas. 4 by 5 or less points against mostly good teams. Texas, Arizona, Marquette. A couple of them weren't as good. BYU, Arizona State, Nebraska certainly. Baylor Schleierman is grabbing 8 rebounds per game as a guard. Ryan Kakabrenner is shooting 70% as a big. That's what you want. 15 points per game, 6.7 rebounds, 2.3 blocks. The defense is number 12 in adjusted efficiency. Offense is top 30. They hit and defend 2s well, in the paint in particular, but they're not special from 3, and I'm a little bit concerned about that aspect of it. They don't turn the ball over much. They don't force turnovers. They never go to the bench. 354th in bench minutes played. 4-6 in quad 1, 4-2 in quad 2. So they do pick up against kind of that second tier of credited potential wins. And they have a quad 3 loss as well. But just a young team that's struggled at times, not a lot of depth. And again, the 3-point shooting, if you're not a good 3-point shooting team, that does tend to matter at times. Xavier and Marquette have rocketed to the top here. Xavier's 5-5 in quad 1. They're both 5-5 at quad 1 with a quad 3 loss. Musketeers, 5 players averaging double-digit scoring. They're shooting 40% from 3. That's 4th best in the country. 3 guards all shooting over 41%. They're also allowing 36% of threes and a whole lot of scoring. That's the problem. Strong wins aren't really here either. They beat Providence in overtime. They swept UConn, and they played Indiana, Duke, Gonzaga close, but they also lost to Butler and DePaul. They split with Marquette. That was a 1-point game there. Marquette themselves, 4 guys shooting over 35% from 3. They're the best 2-point shooting team in the country at almost 60% as a team. They lost 2 double overtime games. They beat Baylor earlier in the season, Creighton once already. They're small, and it's crushing them on the boards. That's bad. The free throws aren't great. That's bad. They're good at stealing the ball, but they give up a lot of shots, and they're giving points away from the boards. They're a point away from getting swept by Xavier. I can't see any Big East teams making the championship game at this point or winning it, certainly. I can't advance any moving forward at this particular point. So let's move on to some of the smaller conferences. Just worth noting here, there are 23 teams currently with 20-plus wins. Liberty in the A-Sun, Canisius State in the A-Sun, UNC Asheville in the Big South, UC Santa Barbara, the Gauchos out of the Big West, Hofstra and the Colonial, and Charleston in the Colonial. Charleston was ranked at one point. They're 25-3. They could probably still get a bid, at-large bid, even if they don't win the auto bid. UNC Wilmington out of the Colonial as well. Houston out of the American, Florida Atlantic out of Conference USA, which is pretty strong this year. Kent State and Toledo out of the MAC. Drake out of the Missouri Valley. Furman out of the Southern Conference. Oral Roberts out of the Summit. Southern Miss is 23-4 out of the Sun Belt. Louisiana and Marshall out of the Sun Belt as well. Utah State out of the Western Athletic Conference. I know you've been watching a lot of those games. And out of the Mountain West, we have San Diego State, Nevada, Utah State, Boise State sitting at 19 wins. So we'll touch on the competitive Mountain West in just a moment here. No A10 teams. That conference has actually been pretty awful this year. 10 teams hovering right around 500 or worse in overall and conference play. That's usually a multi-bid league, or I should say they've gotten multiple bids previously. VCU, Dayton, Fordham, St. Louis, Duquesne are in the upper level of that conference, but the net rankings are horrific. I'm not sure that they'll get an at-large bid. Probably just whoever grabs the auto. The depth just isn't there this season. KenPom has them ranked the 12th strongest out of all the conferences, 30-plus conferences total, but 12th is really not good. So let's touch briefly on the Mountain West and Charleston, FAU, Gonzaga, some of these teams here. Florida Atlantic, 2-1 in Q1 matchups, 3-2 in Q2, 36th in KenPom, and ranked up there as well in the AP. No bad losses. They lost by 13 at Ole Miss. That'd be not a great loss, all things considered, for like a Power 5 school. So we certainly have to take that into account. No big wins to point to. The metrics aren't bad, but there's nothing really to write home about. Janelle Davis and a Johnny Martin are solid shooters and guards that can certainly lead a run. So this is a good team, just not a championship winning team. Charleston is actually a top 70 team, 0-1 in quad 1, 3-0 in quad 2. A couple quad 3 losses by a combined 5 points to Drexel and Hofstra, and a 14-point loss there to North Carolina. That was the quad 1 opportunity. Decent on both sides of the ball. 5 players averaged double figures. Again, Hofstra could steal the auto bid or whoever wins the tournament there, but they could still grab an at-large due to the metrics there. The Mountain West now, 3 teams in the 18 to 40 ranking range. Utah State is 0-4 in quad 1 wins, 2 losses in the quad 4 region. Boise State's 1-3 in quad 1, has 2 losses in the 3-4 quads. San Diego State and Nevada are looking a little bit better in those metrics. Again, this has been a very competitive, very good conference. Remember, New Mexico was the last team to actually take a loss this year, so they looked very good early, although they've been fading late. Nevada, 3-4 in quad 1, no bad losses. And San Diego State is 2-4 in quad 1, no bad losses. So the Wolfpack actually has a top 50 offense and defense adjusted the efficiency rated there. The number 3 in free throws in the country. The shooting isn't great, isn't elite. They split with San Diego State already. They pretty much don't have a bench. They work with just the starters. San Diego State has a top 50 offense and a top 20 defense. They shut down the 3 ball. They give up a lot of shooting inside the arc, over 50%. That's 246th in the country. They've got depth, but only 1 double-figure scorer to lean on. So there are some good teams here, but just too many flaws and not enough just talent here to actually win a championship, which is truly what we're after here. Gonzaga and St. Mary's and Houston are the last 3 that are really worth touching on here. Gonzaga is a top 20 team still, 14th in KenPom. They packed the non-conference schedule. They're still led by Drew Timme and Julian Strother, who can really hit some deep threes. 41% shooter from out there. He's spectacular. They're 22nd in 3-point shooting, 7th in 2-point shooting. Great offensive numbers outside of the free throw shooting, which isn't good, isn't great. They don't stop teams from shooting very well either. The defensive numbers have not been spectacular. It's not a very good defensive team. Wins over Xavier, Alabama, Michigan State, Kentucky. Losses to Texas, Purdue, Baylor, St. Mary's, and Loyola Marymount, who also beat St. Mary's as well. That team's managed to get both of the top tier squads in the WCC there. St. Mary's has actually beat Gonzaga. They beat them in overtime, 78-70, and will play them again to close the season. They've got 5 losses, all by 5 points or less. Houston was one of those that they came up short against. 2 games were in overtime, so just real close to being there. They play at a snail's pace. They hit a good number of threes, bad at the free throw line. The defense is top 5 in adjusted efficiencies. They hold opponents to 32% from 3 and 44.5% from 2. Aiden Mahoney shoots 40% from the field, 45% from the field, 40% from 3. Alex Dukas, 42% from the field, 43% from 3. That's not spectacular there, but the defensive numbers are good. They play slow games, and right now they look better than Gonzaga does. Now, Houston is another one of these teams. Now, they're 4-1 in Quad 1, 7-0 in Quad 2, 1 Quad 3 loss, which was a 1-point loss to Temple, and then the other one was a 5-point loss to Alabama. And this team's nearly undefeated in that case. They're in and out of the number 1 overall ranking. They play very slow, 349th in tempo, but they're also 6th in adjusted defensive metrics, 3rd in offense. Outside of 70% at the line, this team is top 5 in a lot of defensive statistical categories, top 30 in a few others. Offense is a little bit more generous, but this team still stifles people when they're healthy, which they weren't at all last season during their run, and they've really turned around and performed up to expectations. Marcus Sasser, Jarris Walker are the only 2 scorers that average double figures, but 3 others are over 9 points per game, closing in on 10. 4 guys shoot over 35% from 3. Javon Roberts is a good rim protector, and they take care of the ball. So they operate at a similar pace to St. Mary's, but are a little bit more effective at it. But these 3 teams, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Houston, are probably the best of the non-Power 5 group. It may be a little crazy at this point to have any consideration for St. Mary's as a national championship contender, or to have Gonzaga even in the mix, either with some of their performances. But I actually think all 3 of these teams could potentially win a national championship. Yeah, certainly with higher seedings, which they could be aligned for, especially if St. Mary's continues to win out here. Houston is probably going to be a number 1 seed. So I'm moving all 3 on in my rankings here. So just a couple of notes here per KenPom. Major teams in the top 40 strength of schedule in the non-conference. Most difficult non-conference schedules. Just a few teams of note here. So Gonzaga was 4th. Alabama was 7th, playing very difficult schedules there. North Carolina was 17th. Obviously, they didn't take advantage of a lot of those opportunities. San Diego State was 21st, Kansas 24th, Oregon 30th, Memphis 31st, and Creighton 33rd. Obviously, Creighton took a lot of losses in there, as well as did Oregon. Now, at the bottom of that list, on the flip side, now Missouri, Utah, Syracuse, Illinois, NC State, all teams that could be in the tournament. Their non-conference strength of schedules were all in the 300s. Did not challenge themselves, or their opponents did not work out to be real tough teams. Clemson's at 320, TCU's at 323, Rutgers 342, Providence 351. Fordham could win the Atlantic 10 and be the auto bid for the group there, but they're 363, dead last in non-conference strength of schedule. The A10 is in terms of getting a second team in because they're so weak. So just keep that in mind come bracket time. So the teams I have on my list that could win a national championship: Baylor, Kansas, Texas, Purdue, UCLA, Arizona, Alabama, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Houston, and Miami. And again, I'm going to have Tier 1 or championship contenders, teams that can very much so win the national championship, and a second tier of teams where if everything breaks right, they can at least play in the national championship game. It's very difficult to see them winning it, but it's not completely impossible. So I've limited it down to 11 teams here. So let's give them a Tier 1 definite contenders and a Tier 2, but can't quite pull down a championship. So I already discussed Miami and not really liking what they've been able to do outside of the guard play, some of the defensive issues. I don't think that they will win the national championship. I think they could get as far as the national championship game, and even playing the national championship game, I think gives you an opportunity. But if they came out champs, I don't know how you wouldn't say that they were like the 8th best team in the tournament, barring some major unforeseen circumstances in the last 2 or 3 games of the regular season, the ACC tournament. It would just be wild, but they could still get within the cusp there. So we'll put them at a Tier 2. I have reservations about both Alabama and with Purdue as well. Alabama and Purdue could both very well be number 1 overall seeds in the NCAA tournament, but history tells us that freshman guard play, and particularly how Purdue is finishing up the back end of this season, is not recipe for true success for a championship run. So I'm penciling them down for now to Tier 2, the if everything breaks right tier with Miami. And I'm moving Alabama down there as well, although, man, let's put them on hold to actually move them back up again. The turnovers are a problem. I don't like the turnover stuff. I like some of the efficiency metrics, but some of the pace, some of the not hitting threes, although the defense piece, the offensive defensive numbers on both sides are great. But at the end of the day, the reason that the top teams win is because they're great offensively, defensively. They restrict the other team's shooting. They shoot very well themselves. They hit free throws. They stop the turnovers. They have solid guard play. And Alabama's turnovers, despite having a lot of other key metrics, it just seems very unlikely they'd win the national championship. I'm also moving Arizona down because of that as well. Turnover problems, just got a lot of issues with the way that they play. Same way that got them eliminated early last season and eventually getting pummeled and outscored. It seems like they'd have similar issues this year. UCLA not beating teams is a problem. I just think that's a big problem. The metrics look good, and they could very well be a team that wins the national championship, and you'd go, how in the hell did they do this when they didn't beat like the top 5 teams in the regular season schedule? I mean, I think that'd be baffling. And that's so difficult to see, really, at this point. Now they have an opportunity to win a couple more games here. Arizona again. USC's on the schedule. They'll have an opportunity to potentially play them again in the Pac-12 championship. Certainly looks like that. They shouldn't be upset. I wouldn't think anywhere earlier than semifinals where they have a chance to play them, one of those teams. But right now, there's no reason to put UCLA in an upper crust. And St. Mary's can't quite put there either. Some of the metrics don't quite match up with that team. And Gonzaga, the defense, is a problem as well. So ironically enough, that leaves me with the Big 12 teams: Baylor, Kansas, Texas, and then Houston as well. And I got to tell you, you can argue Houston's strength of schedule, particularly in the conference, American Conference, where I think Tulane is currently second, is not as strong, even though they played a decent non-conference schedule 2 or 3 months ago. But the metrics really look great for that particular team. That's the kind of team that really looks like it'll win a national championship. I have no problem penciling them right in to the top tier. Baylor, Kansas, Texas. Again, I have no idea what to do with the Texas coaching situation or how to figure that into any of this. That would be a hell of a story if they did win a national championship. Right now, I think I'm pushing all 3 of these teams in. None of them have super glaring weaknesses that would potentially differentiate them from other previous winners. Baylor's taking some time to get going here. They give up a lot of 2-pointers. That's a problem. 52% is what they allow. But the offense is so incredibly proficient, and they're so good at what else they do. It's just hard not to overlook a couple areas there. And again, they're just not always healthy. They're just not always healthy, and I think they finally are at this particular point. Arizona already ruled them out. Baylor, Texas, and Kansas again in the mix. And they move at a little bit slower pace, but are top 20 in offensive and defensive efficiency. The free throws are a little bit lower than you'd like to see at 72%. But right now, my championship contenders, Baylor, Kansas, Texas, or Houston. So Big 12 team or the Cougars. And if everything breaks right, teams, or teams you could potentially see in the national championship game, certainly the Final Four, Miami, Alabama, Arizona, Purdue, UCLA, Gonzaga, or St. Mary's. And that is currently my lineup of teams that can win the national championship, which is going to be contradictory to everything you see or hear from now up until the actual Final Four. Please check out our brothers at the Not to Mention podcast, the DeWitt Brother Trio. I run that over there. A great adventure, their stories, their times, their investigations. Just a great podcast over there and their support. The Polymuse podcast is still dropping, covering System of a Down, the work that myself and Ben have put together covering that great group. Thank you for supporting myself and NoPulp.com. I haven't written anything new up there for over a year, but I do have an article for the first time in like 14 months covering the NBA trade deadline and the drafts and the wrap up there from last week. So I do have a fresh article up there, no-pulp.com. And I just thank you very much for the support and the creativity and the outlets that this provide for myself and my team. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'll talk to you later.